Surprises, a series in which I talk about games or series that I had no reason or expectations for and yet somehow ended up really liking. Entries in this will be somewhat infrequent. As a general rule, I'm fairly accurate in predicting what I will and I won't like, but I have been known to be proven wrong before, so whenever it does happen, it's only appropriate that I say something about it. Moving on to the main course, the Saints Row series. I had absolutely no idea what this even was, really, apart from the fact that it was supposedly a Grand Theft Auto clone. However, a trip to my Xbox 360 achievements revealed that I had played it once upon a time, but apparently it hadn't been a strong enough game that I'd even remembered having done so, so that really didn't give me a great deal of confidence going into Saints Row 2, but I ended up being incredibly surprised at how much I liked it. One look at the visuals told me that this was a lot like the older GTA games with the much more simpler cartoony graphics, as well as the over-the-top zany humor and the larger-than-life characters. This game actually sticks true to something Grand Theft Auto 4 kind of lost sight of. It moved more towards realism with dark grays and browns in the textures, realistic physics, and I suppose that's kind of the hot thing these days, and there is definitely a market for it, but I think a lot of the old-school magic was lost in that transition. Saints Row 2 is perfectly happy to hang its hat in the old arcadey world of the previous GTA titles, and I think all the better for it, because it definitely shines. The basic setup is that you're the leader of the 3rd Street Saints, a street gang, and you've been in a coma for 3 years, and when you awaken, you're tasked with rebuilding the organization from ground up. Basically, this means taking back over your territory and wiping out the other gangs that have sort of taken over while the 3rd Street Saints have fallen apart. Now, as a general rule, wanton destruction does not hold the same appeal for me it once did. I hate to use pompous terms such as moved on or advanced beyond something. But I think it's applicable here that if there's not a narrative thread tying together exactly why I'm out on the street causing chaos, I have a hard time maintaining interest in something. But the wanton destruction on offer here is pretty good and considerably easier than GTA 4 thanks to a return of an old friend of mine regenerating health. Some people love it, some people hate it. I personally tend to think it makes games more accessible as more advanced players can simply just up the difficulty and get away from it altogether if it's something they really don't like. Now anyway, off of the gameplay and into the storyline and characters that make up the street gangs, and I actually use the term street gang somewhat loosely. I'm by no means an expert on urban culture or gang culture at all, but if I had to go out on a limb here, I'd say this is what a corporate CEO thinks gangs are like. $1,000 tattoos, gold-plated piercings, color-coordinated clothing and cars. I'm going to assume this is not entirely accurate. However, given the overtop nature of the story and many other events in the game, I'm going to assume this was something that was probably done deliberately to fit in with the rest of everything else, and if it was, I think it actually works to the game's advantage. Anyway, the gangs themselves are pretty stereotypical and stock, I guess. You got the standard Asian gang, you got the standard voodoo gang, the standard brutish gang, and the characters in the gangs themselves are all larger than life. And once again, I think this is pretty cool. I mean, it's not realistic, but what else is really in this game? As a matter of fact, the only pitfall I can think with this game that really distracted me somewhat was the activities, or distractions, or whatever you want to call them. They're basically side things you can do outside of the main plot, and they're advertised as something that appears to be kind of optional, just something to do whenever you're killing time, but they're not really optional at all, because you have this thing known as the respect meter, which must be filled to 100% in order to access the next main plot mission. That's right, the game literally puts a padlock on the main plot and will not let you play it until you've fulfilled whatever their requirements are. It's kind of annoying since most of these activities kind of suck. At least they did for me, and I had no desire to ever play them. I have to assume this was probably done to pad out the length of the game, since if they allowed you to play everything from the start in succession, you'd find it's a pretty short game by GTA 4 standards. But something small like that isn't really enough to detract from the overall experience, and I really greatly enjoyed Saints Row 2. It was good enough for me that I actually decided to buy the third game, Saints Row the Third. I don't have as much to say about this one except for the fact that whatever underlining current of seriousness remained in the series was pretty much thrown out the window in this one in favor of completely over-the-top zany humor. And I'm not entirely sure this is the direction I would have taken it. The humor itself is about as hit and miss as humor usually is for me. It's like about, I guess you could say, 200 strikes with maybe one home run, if you're lucky. It wasn't what you'd call a deal breaker for me, but I can see how it would be for some, so the humor may take some getting used to. But anyway, the basic setup for this game is the 3rd Street Saints have become kind of corporate sellouts in the years following Saints Row 2 with their own clothing brand, energy drinks, and the whole thing. and they're swiftly kicked back down to the bottom of the totem pole by a new criminal organization called the Syndicate and forced to start over from scratch again and rebuild their empire. And honestly, I think I just realized something that kind of bothered me about the series at this point: lack of progression. The first game had you building up the 3rd Street Saints into sort of a powerhouse, which you do, and then the second game had you rebuilding them from the ground up since you were in a coma for 3 years, and this game has you kicked back down to the bottom by another organization, then you have to build your way up again. I guess the writers thought that if something was worth doing once, it was worth doing 3 times. And while we're on the subject of writing, although I don't know why I'm making the effort at all, I'm going to talk about one character in Saints Row 3 that kind of threw me off, I guess you could say. The character is Shandi. In Saints Row 2, she was more or less just a cool, laid-back stoner chick who gave you intel on things and helped you set up jobs and whatever else. Saints Row 3, she abandons that personality, and what she gets in its place is more or less a cold, distant, and vaguely bitchy attitude. This is explained, I guess, because she's sort of coming to terms with the death of another main character from Saints Row 2 who dies in a prologue to Saints Row 3, though this comes off as contrived and forced to me since they never had any meaningful interaction in the second game, and I don't think they ever shared a line of dialogue, and yet somehow his death is enough to make her character do a complete 180 in personality. If I had to guess, I'd say this is to sort of incorporate the more standard femme fatale of having an attractive female but with a cold personality. I guess you could look at the character model change from Saints Row 2 into 3 for evidence to support that argument. Though, like I said, I don't know why I'm bothering to make the effort in the first place on this. I mean, trying to find plot holes or argue character inconsistency in a game that lets you wield a giant sex toy and knock people into trees with it is kind of a fruitless endeavor, I think. But anyway, to be perfectly honest, there's not a whole lot for me to say about Saints Row 3 that won't just talk about Saints Row 2 again. They copy and pasted quite a lot from it, though for some reason character customization is fairly bland this time around. It's kind of a disappointing turn of events. I thought things were supposed to get better as they went on, not worse. But anyway, the actual game has actually got a little bit better as far as how it plays anyway. Steering seems to be a bit better this time, as well as the gunplay's been greatly improved and actually flows a lot faster. There's even some weapon customization options or upgrades if that's sort of your cup of tea. Now, if I had to pick one game in the series to recommend, it would probably be the second game, but that doesn't mean Saints Row 3 is a bad one. It's really not. It's just the humor was a bit hard to get used to, and the storyline lacks any kind of sense of real progression. But still, if I had to be honest, I'd say pretty much any game in the series would be a fairly enjoyable experience for anyone who enjoys this kind of gameplay experience. That pretty much covers everything. I hope everyone enjoyed this. This is Judgespektre, signing off.
When God is gone and the devil takes hold, oh, have mercy on your soul. No gold, nothing satisfies me but